Day, Miss Lawson here. We are starting this week going back to our regular math curriculum, and I am so excited about it. I hope that you guys are equally as excited about it. Just so you know what we're up against this week, we are going to be doing topic 14-1 today, 14-2 tomorrow, 3 on Wednesday, 14-4 on Thursday, and then Friday, you guys are going to have a test on Study Island all about converting customary units of measurement. Now, I know we started talking about this in technology class before we ended up leaving school back in March. So we're going to kind of pick right back up here because if we were at school at this time, this is where we would be. So this may seem familiar to some of you guys, and if it does, that is fabulous. You're just going to be a little bit ahead of the game here this week. So let's get right to it, okay? We're starting with the customary units of length. Now, I remember when we were back at school, we talked all about how the customary units are the units of measurement that are used here in the United States. I'm curious if any of you guys can remember what the rest of the world uses, what that system is called. Think about that for a second. That's the one that we are going to be talking about next week. And if you can remember, you can actually leave it in a comment on this post because I would absolutely love to see that you remembered what it was called. All right, let's dive into customary units of length. So our words to know, we have a toy car, which is right here. We have an inch, which they're demonstrating for us here on this ruler. We have a paper clip, and we have a foot. They are demonstrating 1 foot with a ruler.
How do you estimate and measure length? Think about this question during the lesson. The United States uses customary units of measure. About how long is Greg's toy car?
Okay.
Let's find out.
So we have Greg's toy car here, and they're asking us about how long his toy car is. So we are trying to make an estimate of the length of his car. Now we can use a tool for measuring this to get an exact, and that tool is called a ruler. But if we were just trying to find an estimate, we can really use any non-standard form of measurement. So if you guys remember back starting probably in kindergarten or first grade when y'all were talking about measurement, you guys were able to use different objects. Sometimes you would use snap cubes, you could use marshmallows, you could use those cool little teddy bears, and you would, as long as they were all the same size, you could line them up along the bottom of the car here to see how many of that object, that non-standard unit of measure, you could figure out to make an appropriate estimate of that vehicle, okay? We talked about an object when we were back at school that is about 1 inch long. And if you guys remember, I showed it to you. And then at one point, I think I even chucked it across the room at my desk. If you guys can remember what that object was, it was a
Look at the
paper clip.
How would you measure the length of the toy car in inches using the paper clip?
Okay, so we have this non-standard unit of measurement here, and we are going to be using a paper clip, which is approximately the size of 1 inch, or the length of 1 inch, I should say. So if we have this paper clip, notice how they have it lined up at the front bumper of the vehicle, because that's right where the start of it is. If you looked at this, about how many paper clips do you think it would take for us to get to the end of the vehicle? I want you guys to think about what that number is. Take a second. How many paper clips would it take to get from this part of the vehicle to this part of the vehicle? I kind of feel like we're on Dora the Explorer right now where I'm waiting for you guys to answer. So think about it. Have your answer in your head.
The paperclip is about 1. The toy car is shorter than a foot, so the best unit to use is inches.
Okay, before we get into our estimate, because I know y'all are chomping at the bit ready to tell me how many paper clips you think, we also talked about using units that are the most appropriate. So even though this car looks quite large in compared to this young man that's standing here, it's a toy car. So I want you guys to think about it. It's bigger than like a little Matchbox car, but it's not quite as big as like I don't know, a car for Barbies or something like that. So it's a smaller car. It's not the same size as Miss Lawson's car. It's not the same size as your parents' car. It's a toy car. So the most appropriate unit for this is going to be inches because feet would be too big. The car is smaller than 1 foot in length, and therefore it's more appropriate to use a smaller unit, which would be inches.
About how long is the toy car in inches?
Now's where I want y'all to tell me how many of these paper clips do you think would take to fill the length of this vehicle? One, I don't know.
The car is about 3 inches long.
If you came up with 3 inches, 3 paper clips, you could reach your hand up nice and high up in the air and then bend it back to give yourself a nice pat on the back. Great job to you. If you didn't, that's okay too.
If you want to measure the length of a real car, would you use an inch or a foot?
All right. So now we're not actually going to do this, but if you went outside and you wanted to measure the length of your parents' vehicle, would you use an inch to measure that paperclip, or would you be using a ruler, a foot, to measure the car? You want to think, when you're thinking of the most appropriate unit, what is going to get you to your answer, the length, the fastest and most efficient way. So in this instance, think, would it be more appropriate for you to use an inch or a foot?
You would use a foot to measure the length of a real car because you don't have to use as many foot units as inch units.
If you came up with feet, you are absolutely correct. I think this might be the part where I chucked my paperclip across the room because I said, I'm not going to measure my car with a paperclip because it would take me forever to do that. It would just take way too much time and would not be efficient.
Now look at the ruler placed beneath the toy car. What is the length of the toy car to the nearest inch?
Okay, so
let's find out.
Now we have a tool that we use in the customary system, which is called a ruler. Notice how this ruler is only showing the unit of inches. Notice how when they're measuring the car, they are lining up the ruler at 0 with the beginning of the car. You must always line up at the 0, not at the end of the ruler, because you will not get an accurate reading. So always make sure you start at that 0. And what we want to do is we want to figure out how long this toy car is to the nearest inch. So this would be 1 inch. That's only up to the edge of my hood here, kind of near my windshield. This would be 2 inches. I'm about a quarter of the way through my tire here. This would be 3 inches. I'm just beyond my bumper. So we want to know about, to the nearest inch. Is the length of the car to the 2 inches? Is it the nearest to the 2 inches, nearest to 3 inches, or 4 inches? I want you guys to take a second, think that over, have your answer in your head, and let's find out.
Begin by lining up one end of the toy car with the 0 mark on the ruler.
You know me, I always go ahead of them.
Then find the inch mark closest.
We talked about that.
Greg's toy car is about 3 inches long to the nearest inch.
Perfect. So if y'all came up with 3 inches, you are correct. Because if we look at this mark right here would be 2.5 inches because it's right in between the 2 and the 3. So if we're talking about decimals, this is going to be 2 and 1/2 or 2.5 or 2 and 5/10 or 2 and 50 hundredths. And then here is where our car ends, which is just before 3 inches, which makes it the nearest inch.
Why do you begin at the 0 mark and not at the 1 inch mark?
Now, we talked about this just a moment ago, but it is super important. So we're beginning at the 0 mark and not at the 1 inch mark because it's easier for us to start measuring from 0. We could technically line up our ruler at 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, but then we would have to do subtraction to figure out how many inches it actually is. So it's always best to start right at that 0.
You can begin at any mark, but it is easier to measure if you begin at 0 because it is easier to subtract 0 from any number. Why do you not measure the toy car to the nearest foot?
So why are we measuring to the nearest inch and not the nearest foot? Well, it goes back to that appropriate unit for measuring. This toy car is smaller than 1 foot, so it does not make sense for us to measure it in feet because it would be negative feet. It would not be, it's not even equivalent to even 1 foot, let alone more than 1 foot. So it's appropriate for us to use a smaller unit, and the smallest unit of length in the customary system is inches.
You do not measure the toy car in feet because this unit of measure is too large. Now you know how to use customary units to estimate and measure the length of objects.
Awesome. What I would love to do with you guys is I would actually love to go ahead and do our quiz. Now, it's not going to be as much fun because we don't all have our dry erase boards and all of our stuff, and we can't be doodling, but it's all right. We're going to go through it anyway. So let's look at these questions together, okay? Our first question says, what is the most appropriate unit to measure the length of a spoon? So they are talking about that normal spoon that you would have in your kitchen that you would eat your bowl of cereal with, your yogurt, your ice cream if you're like me and Winston. And we want to think about the length of that. So visualize a spoon in your head and ask yourself, which one of these units do you think would be the most appropriate to measure the length of a spoon? An inch, a foot, a yard, or a mile? So before we go into this, I know we did it in class, but I don't feel like our Envision video really went into it. These are actually in order right now from least to greatest. So an inch is the smallest unit of customary measurement. A foot is the next largest, so it's a little bit larger than an inch. It's actually 12 inches is equivalent to 1 foot. Then you have yards, which is 3 feet. And then you have a mile. The mile is the largest unit of length. And I like to think about miles specifically when we're talking distance. So how long it takes to get from point A to point B, okay? So if we're talking about a spoon, would it be appropriate for us to measure in inches, feet, yards, or miles? If you are thinking inches, then you are correct. Any of these other units would be too large and therefore inappropriate to measure the length of a spoon. Okay, our next one says, which is the best estimate of the length of a child's bedroom? Now, if you guys remember back to class, if we're visualizing a bedroom or your bedroom at home, you might say, you're not going to measure it in inches because that would be too small. You're not going to measure it in miles because that's going to be too large. We want to think distance when we think miles. And you might be stuck somewhere here between B and C. So my rule of thumb is whenever they're asking you to measure a room, the length of a room, is always to use feet. Whenever you're talking about a room, you're going to use feet. Yards comes in groups of 3 feet, and therefore you're not going to get an as accurate measurement as you would if you used feet. So always go with feet for rooms. Okay, our next one, we have a ruler here and this line segment right above it. If you guys can see the line segment here, we want to measure the length of this line segment to the nearest inch. So notice how they start it down here at 0. This one just happens to have 0 right on the very edge. Most rulers that you're going to come across, the edge of the ruler is going to be over here a little more, but this one just happens to work out perfectly. So we're looking right at the beginning. It goes through the 1 inch, it goes through the 2 inch, but it doesn't quite make it to 3 inches. So which one of these inches do you think that line segment is the nearest to? 2 inches or 3 inches? If you are going with 2 inches, then you are correct. Our next question says, which is the best estimate for the length of a mop? So I'm sure you guys all have a mop at home. If you don't have a mop at home, you can visualize a broom. If I stand it up next to me, it comes up to the middle of my arm, I suppose, my upper arm, like near my shoulder kind of. It's pretty tall in length. Now, MI is the abbreviation for miles, YD is the abbreviation for yards, FT is the abbreviation for feet, and IN is the abbreviation for inches. So if we're thinking of something that is the length of a mop, which is not quite as tall as Miss Lawson, but it's really close, how are you going to measure that length? Right away, I'm going to eliminate miles because we're not talking about distance. It's not going to be that long. And I'm also going to eliminate inches because measuring my height in inches is going to take way too long. So I'm stuck between feet and yards. And we want to use the most appropriate unit for this. So it's going to be the one that is smaller. So I am going to go with feet for measuring the length of a map. And then our last question here says miles would be the most appropriate unit for measuring the length of which object? The Statue of Liberty, the Amazon River, a Mexican taco, or a Japanese maple tree. So if we keep in mind that rule of distance for using the unit of miles, do you think we're going to measure the distance of the Statue of Liberty or the height of the Statue of Liberty? If you're saying height, you're correct. So it's not going to be the Statue of Liberty. The Amazon River is the second largest river in the world. It spans a great distance. A taco is probably what Miss Wilson's going to have for dinner tonight, is not something that we're going to measure in distance. And a tree, would you measure that in height or distance? If you're saying height for that, you are correct as well. So the best option here is going to be B, the Amazon River. So I don't know if y'all were watching me. I think I clicked all the correct answers, but let's see. Drum roll, please. Man, I miss you guys. Yay, we got them all correct. So what you guys are going to do now is you are going to complete the attached P page. So you guys are going to do workbook page P14-1. If you need any assistance on this at all, please have your parents send me a message on Dojo and I will do my best to assist you. Whenever it's asking you for what the appropriate unit is, keep in mind you want to think about the one that's going to make the most sense to measure its length, okay? In addition to finishing your P page today, what I want for you to do is I want for you to find an object somewhere in your house. It could be any object that you want, and I want you to snap a photo of it and then tell me what customer unit of length you would use to measure that object. So for example, I have my yoga mat. And the most appropriate unit I would use to measure the length of my yoga mat would be feet. I'm not going to measure it in inches because that would take me too long. And I'm not going to measure it in yards because I would not get as accurate of a reading. Also, keep in mind, I don't know if you'll remember, but I said to you guys when we were back in the classroom, yards is usually, almost always, going to be the unit that is used for any kind of sporting field. So if you're thinking football field, think yards. If you're thinking soccer field, think yards, okay? If you have any questions, I'm here for you guys. I miss y'all so much. Have a great day.